What's stopping you from becoming a Catholic?
Why can't women become priests?
Why do Catholics worship Mary?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest? Where is purgatory in the Bible?
I think the Pope has too much authority.
What's stopping you? You are called to communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey everybody, welcome again to Call to Communion, the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. Those of you who have questions about the Catholic faith, this is a great resource to get those questions answered. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. If you're listening or watching outside of North America, please dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. That number is just for you. Also, you can text the letters EWTN to 55000, wait for our response, and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. Those of you watching us on TV today, you can participate as well. Our email address, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. Rich Jesse is our phone screener. Jeff Burson is working social media, and he will pass on any questions you might want to pose via YouTube or Facebook. Just put those in the comments section. He will shoot those to us here in Studio One. I'm Tom Price, along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Very well. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing well, thank you.
I'm so glad. And we're going to lead off here with an email from Patrick, who says, I want to be a Catholic, but my wife doesn't. I told her I feel called to Catholicism and that if she didn't, well, that's okay. But she adamantly disagrees and says, hey, we are one. We should not worship God separately or split up our family that way. So should I wait and pray until she's ready to come in with me and keep talking about it with her, or just come in on my own, accepting whatever happens? I do worry about what it'll do to our marriage, possibly a divorce, also our family as well. I want to love my wife the way Jesus and the church tells us to, so how can I in this instance? And again, that's from Patrick.
Thanks, Patrick. I appreciate the question, and I'm deeply, deeply sympathetic to your plight since I have been there. Yeah. I have been in that situation. And, you know, I'll tell you a story from my own history, and this may not be relevant to you because I'm not suggesting you do what I did, but here's what I did when I was in that position. I realized that becoming Catholic was going to create serious strife in my family, and so I didn't become Catholic, not initially. And I thought, well, I'm going to have to just put this behind me and try to deal because I can't cope with the emotional distress of a divided home. And I went back to the Protestant church with my wife. Problem was, I didn't believe it anymore. Didn't believe the Protestant faith. I knew it was wrong. I knew it was not the church founded by Christ, and I knew the doctrines that were being presented to me didn't reflect the will of God or the right way to have a relationship with Him. And so I was spiritually weakened. I was innervated, so depleted, and I would go to the services and sort of sit there like a lump on a log, just devoid of spiritual energy. And it began to pour out into my family life in the way that I tried to engage my wife and children morally, the stories I could tell, the values that I could express, because I knew I was living in contradiction to my own conscience. And that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And so if you indefinitely, now here is the takeaway I'll give you for your own situation. If you indefinitely put off following your conscience, you will destroy yourself. You will destroy yourself, and you will deplete and become just an empty shell of a human being. We have to follow conscience. You know, the Protestant theologian Martin Luther, who founded the Reformation, I disagree with about 99% of what the guy said. But he said one thing I really do agree with. When he was called on by authorities of his own day to recant, his response was, my conscience is held captive to the Word of God, and to disobey conscience is neither right nor safe. Well, in that, he never said a truer word. That's exactly right. To disobey conscience is neither right nor safe. So if you believe the truth of the Catholic faith, then you will have to become Catholic lest you live at odds with your own conscience. Now, how do you do that in a way that's most sensitive to the needs of your wife and family and your particular domestic situation? Well, first of all, you can be patient. and you don't have to become Catholic in the most obnoxious way possible. You can do it sort of gently and slowly and quietly in conversation and sensitivity and lots of listening to your wife. But you can also plead the defense of conscience. You can agree on principle. I want to worship God with you together as a family. What does that look like? What does that look like? Are we collaborating in our relationship with God? Are we engaged in a common project? If the way we live that out requires one of us to be radically at odds with his or her conscience. Mm-hmm. And there's different kinds of unity. I mean, there's a kind of formal unity. And by formal here, I mean formalistic, because we attend the same services or the same rites, but without a real unity of heart and mind. And I think that if you could get to the point where you understand that it is more important for us to be united in charity mm-hmm. and in the desire for wisdom than it is for us to be united in liturgical form, right? If that union entails the loss of the other.
Sure. Okay, and Patrick, thank you so much for your email. Here's a real quick one now from Prosperin, who says, could you please talk more about the claims of some Protestants that apostolic succession ended during the installation of anti-popes?
Well, sure. So apostolic succession does not require it doesn't pass from the Pope to every priest in the world, right? It passes through the episcopacy as an institution, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like not every bishop is ordained directly by the Pope or mm-hmm. installed as a bishop by the Pope. May do it by the Pope's authority, but the Pope is not one that is administering the sacrament. Right. Any more than, the priests don't have to go to Rome to get ordained. They get ordained by their bishop. So as long as the order of bishops continues and ordinations happen from generation, valid ordinations happen from generation to generation, it does nothing to disturb apostolic succession. Those instances where ecclesial bodies have lost apostolic succession, like, say, the Anglican Communion, it took that other form, right? It wasn't because they broke ranks with the Bishop of Rome, but because they vitiated their sacrament of ordination.
Prosperin, thank you so much for checking us out on Facebook. In a moment, we'll get to the phones and talk with Jasmine in San Diego. There's a line open for you as well right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986 for Call to Communion. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. If you're ready now, let's go to the phones at 833-288-EWTN. And we're going to begin with Jasmine. Jasmine is in San Diego, listening online to EWTN.com. Hey, Jasmine, what's on your mind today?
Hi, yes. I just have a quick question. It might not be actually so quick. Just to give you a little background, I kind of grew up as a Catholic, born and raised. I noticed that early in my teen years, I started distancing myself from religion just because it was something that I found my mom wanted me to do and not something I did out of choice. Since now I'm an adult, I'm finding that I don't have a lot of faith anymore, and my hope is completely gone. So I'm just trying to figure out, and wonder what exactly, how can I build that faith again? Because I feel like I'm completely lost, and I just want to know that I am loved and just to continue down the right path, if you know what I mean.
That's a wonderful question, and how profound the need and the questions that you raise. So, mm-hmm. One of the things that the Church provides for us is the example of holy men and women who have been where you are and where I am and have found their way out of a spiritual morass into a life of transcendent meaning by following Christ. And these individuals, these examples, are the saints. Many people, myself included, derive an enormous amount of benefit from learning about or reading about the lives of the saints, to see how the faith can actually be lived out concretely in the circumstances of a human life. Now, hope, when you talk about hope, I can have faith. I can believe that the world is a certain way, that God has revealed certain things about himself. Hope is believing that those things can work in me, right? That I can get there, that this stuff is meaningful to me. And again, when you see that it takes place in someone else's life, and you watch them go from despair to loving, productive wisdom, then it begins to build my hope that maybe I can follow the same path. So getting to know the saints is a great way. Being in relationship to faithful people who are striving to know and love God and serve their neighbor is another tremendous, tremendous tool to grow in our own virtue of hope. And so I would recommend you begin to seek out and spend time with those people who have that quality of soul that you desire. And as you spend time with them, some of their virtue will begin to rub off on you. Some of their attitudes and their beliefs and practices will begin to make sense to you. I think this is me. For me, I read constantly. I read to make the faith intelligible to myself, right? Because it's one thing to hear the priest say something from the pulpit, and you may hear, well, I don't know if I believe that or not. Does that make sense? Can I connect that to what I know about science or history or the world or my experience? Mm-hmm. And I'm always trying to broaden my conception and place the faith in a context that makes sense. And so I'm always reading. So good spiritual literature. And then finally, please don't neglect the power of prayer, right? Because prayer is putting yourself out there before God. And it can also take the form of a complaint. You can articulate to God. One of my favorite prayers that I get up in the morning often and say is, God, I don't know anything and everything feels like a loss and a wreck, and help, right? I mean, it's okay to pray that way and articulate those prayers. And, I'm not looking for God to answer me verbally, or drop a manila envelope out of the sky. But the very fact of calling my loss and loneliness and alienation into connection with my relationship with God changes its character, makes it into a prayer, makes it something oriented towards the future, right? An expectation that things can get better, that I can return to sanity, to love, and to wisdom. And so don't neglect attending the liturgies of the church, right? And you kind of combine all these things. You have the teaching, example of the saints, the fellowship of other believers, the life of prayer, and as you begin to live and walk sometimes in ways that your feelings don't necessarily conform to, right? You're taking an act of faith. You're putting one foot in front of the other. You'll find that the feelings will begin to follow.
Jasmine, is that helpful for you?
I definitely think that you're leading me down the right path, and I appreciate it. I guess when at a younger age, I kind of felt like, I don't know, I guess perfectionism was just expected, and so that was kind of what I got caught in, and I got confused. So, learning that and accepting that and just kind of learning from those mistakes and still taking that and, as they say, take up your cross. Mm-hmm. I learned that a lot of my situations are kind of, family trauma and things I've gone through. So it's about getting past that hump, forgiving, forgetting, and, just learning to love unconditionally. And I guess that's where I have fallen short, and I'm, needing to really love myself and love God first. And, like you say, just involve myself with the local church and continue to embrace those relationships. So I can definitely do that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Now, I do want to say something about your perfectionism, because that's a serious impediment, honestly, to a life of faith and hope and meaning, particularly if we think of success for ourselves in terms of a kind of abstract standard, and that's where I have to be, right? And if and it may not, that standard may not correspond to God's standard. It might be something of our own invention, or as you say, something that was born out of childhood trauma, and that can lead us down a really bad path towards self-hatred, self-condemnation, and so forth. And the Catholic Church believes in gradualism. Believes that if I've got 1 foot farther down the road than I did yesterday, that's success. That's success. Jesus said, "There's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who have no need of repentance." And, the process of self-discovery and self-transcendence as a Catholic, a lot of times is learning all the things not to do. All right, well, that didn't work, that didn't work, that didn't work. God's not like this, God's not like that. And then at the end of the day, we may find ourselves kind of bereft of any concepts, of any forms, of any little tricks that we think are going to win the day for us. And we realize, I really have nothing. I'm just naked before God. Yeah, exactly right. That's the position we ultimately have to come to. Not conformity to that perfect archetype of our own invention, but the realization that we're just children.
Jasmine, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate hearing from you today, and God bless you. Hey, that opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. I got a kick out of this popping up on the screen here, David. Edmund checking in on Facebook. He says, I will cross the Tiber this Saturday. Does that mean I'll have to stop watching you guys?
Oh, we bill the show as an outreach to non-Catholics, but on the sly, we've got an awful lot of Catholics too.
Absolutely, right? Absolutely. Back to the phones right now at 833-288-EWTN. Here is Louis in Detroit, listening on the great Ave Maria Radio. Hey, Louis, what's on your mind today?
How you doing?
Howdy.
Yeah, just want to ask a question. We have a property, a shopping center, and there's a tenant wants to rent a space that does tattoos. Is there a moral problem in renting the space to this kind of business?
Okay, thanks. I appreciate the question. So, to administer a tattoo to someone is not an intrinsically immoral activity. It is not intrinsically wrong to do tattoos or to have a tattoo. Depending on your cultural context, it might be a foolish thing to do, or wise, depending on where you live and at what time, but it's not intrinsically immoral. Sometimes tattoo parlors can attract a crowd that might be into other things that are a little bit kind of questionable, but that's not limited to tattoo parlors.
No.
You can find that in bookstores and bars and
pretty much anywhere,
right? Exactly. But it's not intrinsically immoral. And you can make a prudential decision about, well, is this the kind of thing I want to have in my shopping center? Am I going to attract a kind of business and a kind of clientele that fits with my picture of what I want my business to be like or my property to be like? Those kinds of considerations are valid and worthwhile, but you don't have to stay away from something just in virtue of the fact that they administer tattoos.
Very good. Louis, thank you so much for your call. It's Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Would love to hear from you today. Those of you watching on TV today, you can participate as well by sending us an email. ctc@ewtn.com is the address. ctc@ewtn.com. Braden checking us out on YouTube today. He says, what affects my decision to become a Catholic is the way Catholics look at Black Lives Matter movement. Why do at least some Catholics disagree with that?
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate the question. I'd like to draw a distinction if I can. The proposition, Black Lives Matter. The proposition, not the organization,
right,
not the social movement. The proposition, Black Lives Matter, is true, deeply true, because Jesus values black lives. That's why it's true. Now, where do I get that idea from? Like, why do we even have these sorts of debates in culture? If you were to go back to the world of ancient Greece or ancient China or India or many other cultures around the world where Christianity had not yet penetrated, you'll find that majority populations had no intellectual problem at all claiming that minority populations did not matter. And in fact, their aims were to either colonize them imperialistically or kill them or destroy them, or in the case of the Aztecs, even to eat them and sacrifice them to their gods, right? Mm-hmm. The notion that all human beings are created in the likeness and image of God and possess an intrinsic dignity as God's children and as brothers and sisters to one another, that is a Christian and Catholic idea. The reason that concept of human dignity and human rights now pervades the regime of international law is because of the influence of Catholicism in world civilization. Prior to the Catholic faith, majority populations had no problem dismissing the worth of or value of minority populations. Now, did it take a while for that truth to penetrate into the minds of all Christians? Sure it did. Sure it did. And Catholics and other Christians have not always historically lived up to the theological principles that they teach. But the principles themselves are of biblical Christian origin. And we agree with them. We agree with them because God says so. We're made in his likeness and image. All of us children of one Father. Okay? Now, that's the proposition. The institution, the social movement, the organization Black Lives Matter is committed to more than just that proposition. It's committed to an ideological position about society, an interpretation of American history, and specific policy pronouncements about how they think inequity ought to be rectified. Now, as a Catholic, I am morally obligated to agree with the proposition. I am not morally obligated to hold a particular policy position about how that proposition should be lived out socially. And you will find that there are Catholics in the United States and elsewhere who are politically on the far left, politically on the far right, politically in the middle, and politically indifferent. Right?
Yeah.
What they can't be is indifferent towards the moral proposition. Pope John Paul II wrote a beautiful encyclical on moral theology called Solicitudo Rei Socialis, in which he said, the Church's social doctrine is not political ideology. It's not left, it's not right, it's not in between. It's moral theology. It's spelling out the dignity of the human person and how that has to be respected, whatever your political position, across civilization.
Okay. Appreciate that. And thank you for checking in, Braden, and for watching us today on YouTube. It's called a Communion here on EWTN. Let's go now to Daisy, one of our younger listeners, listening on Guadalupe Radio in Alexandria, Virginia. Hey, Daisy, what's on your mind today?
Hi, good evening. I have my son. He is 14 years old, and he's hanging with friends that they are homosexual, sexual active, and maybe using drugs. So how can I talk to him to not hang out with them without hurting him? Or what can I do to guide him in a positive way?
Yeah, thank you so much. This is a very difficult thing, all right, that you've asked. How can you guide your son? Maybe keep him away from bad influences without hurting him. I don't know that you can accomplish both of those goals. In other words, if your primary concern is how do I keep from offending him or hurting him or in any way, he may not listen to you, right? And he may run away with the bad crowd. At some point, you're just going to have to say, the right thing for him is not to hang out with these kids. They're going to be a terrible influence on them. They may get him into stuff that's going to hurt him much more than he's going to be offended at me. And just deal with your son being oppositional, right? And but get him away from the people that would really destroy his life. And we live in a very broken culture, and all Christian parents in the modern world are dealing with these and other kinds of issues. And we bleed and we weep when we see our children get involved in stuff that we know is going to hurt them. But we have an obligation to do our best to try to keep them from doing those things.
Absolutely. Daisy, thank you so much for your call. We do appreciate that. We hope it's helpful for you and for your son as well. All right, in a moment here, we're going to be talking with David in Portland, listening on Modern Day Radio. We've got a line open for you as well. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. It's called a Communion here on EWTN. Thanks for joining us, and please stay with us. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. That's 288-3986. We're going to get back to it now with David in Portland, Oregon, listening on our very first affiliate way back in the day. That was Modern Day Radio in Portland. Hey, David, what's on your mind today?
Yes, good morning, and good morning, Dr. Anders. And boy, it's wonderful that you let a cradle Catholic like me sneak into your show.
How can we help you today, David?
I have two questions about salvation. I have a brother who died of alcoholism and AIDS after a long estrangement from his family. His death looked like a suicide. So I'm wondering about his particular judgment and about the final judgment and about God's mercy. That's there's a lot of questions around all this. I'm wondering what you would have to say to me.
Yeah, thank you. I'm really sorry. First of all, my heart goes out to you in your situation, and I think I can imagine what you may have suffered with the loss of your brother. I will tell you that, as I have contemplated the loss of loved ones in my own life and people who I've known and loved that have had similar difficulties, I can say with utter certainty that I don't despair. I don't despair, and I don't ever despair of God's mercy and the possibility of His salvation reaching any soul. And I think that's the attitude that we have to take. And, in our own case, when I think about my own life, well, I don't want to die that way, right? I want to make the most of the time the Lord has given me and try to merit as much eternal reward as I can and form meaningful relationships with God and other people and grow in wisdom and grace and virtue in the belief that those things matter eternally and the quality of my afterlife will be determined by the quality of my present life. That being the case, I'm not going to conclude from that somebody else that I know who, maybe I judge them as not having lived up to snuff, I'm not going to conclude from that God's mercy can't reach them. And obviously I wish they hadn't lived that way. But there's no telling what God can do in a soul. There's a short story by Leo Tolstoy, The Death of Ivan Ilyich. And Ivan is a shallow, superficial, and selfish man who lives for pleasure and reputation and a lot of things that don't matter. And he neglects his wife and he neglects his kids and he just lives a horrible life. And he gets a fatal injury. And as he's moving towards the grave, he's just railing against God and society, and he's bitter and he's upset. But gradually he begins to sort of accept his situation and to think about the quality of his life and the things that he's done wrong. But his conversion happens too late for anyone to notice. And in the last moments of his life, his children come to him and he attempts to ask for their forgiveness, but they misunderstand him as shooing them away, which is the sort of thing he would have done his whole life. And so they leave themselves embittered and lonely and alienated. And then Tolstoy tells us in the last line, but he knew that he who needed to understand had understood, basically God, right? And we don't ever know what transpires in a soul, even in the last moments of their life, between that soul and God. And we know that God desires the salvation of all. And so I wouldn't hesitate to pray for that soul, to commend that soul to God, and even to maintain a hopeful expectation that I might see them again.
And David, we will keep you and your family in our prayers as well. Thank you so much for your call. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Let's go now to Rick in Bloomington, Indiana, listening on Sirius XM Channel 130. Hello, Rick. What's on your mind today?
Yeah, hi. First of all, thank you so much for your show. I listen. It's been a huge blessing. I've grown up Protestant. My family is heavily Protestant. And just reading, the Protestant Bible, I found Catholic truths. And currently in RCIA, I'm trying to explain things to my family, and I'm just met with a bunch of spit and vinegar, venom. There's some deep anti-Catholic sentiment in our culture, and I've noticed recently that honest answers aren't an effective way of addressing that. And I'm just asking, I don't know, is there a better way? Is there a way to combat this anti-Catholic culture that specifically with my family.
Okay, thanks. So, I'm involved in trying to combat anti-Catholic culture all the time. That's like what I do for a living, And but I have found that it is more effective with people who are not my family than with people who are my family. And not always. I mean, I've had some family members that have followed me into the faith, and especially a couple cousins I've got in mind. Hey guys, shout out to you. But not always with those that are closest to us. And we know that dynamic. Jesus talks about it. Prophets not without honor, except in his own home, right?
Oh
yeah. So I think in family relationships, especially when you're not getting an honest hearing, why don't you live in contradiction to their stereotypes? Be the person who takes the higher moral ground. Be the one who bears wrongs patiently and suffers for righteousness' sake, and is a peacemaker and hungers and thirsts for righteousness, is pure in heart, who mourns the loss of those relationships, and so forth, and follow the Beatitudes. Try to live the life of the virtues. I mean, ultimately, it's not our theology that's going to save us. Our theology is a vehicle to lead us into a life of wisdom and virtue that will save us. But having the right ideas could succeed only in making us obnoxious to other people if we carry those right ideas around in pride to beat other people over the head with them.
Yeah.
And be open to those conversations when they come, and answer charitably and with wisdom and grace, but leaving the work of conversion up to God and the Holy Spirit. Jesus himself, Jesus was not overly concerned when other people didn't follow him or didn't believe him. And the disciples were a lot more worried about it than he was. And John chapter 6, when he gives out the teaching on the Eucharist, everybody runs away. And the disciples are kind of dumbfounded by this. And he says, you guys going to leave too? Oh, and we're not going to leave. But Jesus explains this by saying, look, I didn't already tell you that no one can come to me unless the Father draws him?
Yeah.
So we're not going to change what we do. We're going to live the faith. We're going to be generous and kind. And the Lord will draw who the Lord wants to draw.
Rick, thank you so much for your call. It occurs to me, David, as you say, you got to be ready for those conversations when they pop up. And they may not pop up at the Thanksgiving dinner when you've got all these family members around the table, but they might pop up in the kitchen when you're out there doing the dishes with Aunt Marge.
I had a Thanksgiving dinner. It's actually a Thanksgiving dinner several years ago. And I turned to one of my relatives and I said, let me ask you a question. And my fourth son says, oh, Daddy, please, no theological arguments. I said, what are you talking about? I just said, can I ask a question? Yeah, Daddy, but that's how you argue.
Love that. Call to communion here on EWTN. Thanks for joining us today. Let's go now to Elizabeth, looks like. Elizabeth is in California, also listening on Sirius XM, channel 130. Elizabeth, what's on your mind today?
Yes, hi. I wanted to, thank you for your program. I absolutely love it. And my question is, I have a married couple that I am friends with, and the husband is coming out transgendered. I need to know, I want to know if they are able to receive Holy Communion. And should I say something if not?
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I appreciate it. So this individual, a lot depends on what is meant by this affirmation, right? So let's say that somebody says, a man says, I'm just going to be honest, I struggle with my sexual identity. A lot of times I wish I were born a woman. Well, that's an admission of woundedness right there, of emotional brokenness. Nothing wrong with admitting that we're emotionally broken people. This is something that I struggle with. This is my weakness. This is my past trauma. This is my history. This has qualified and characterized my life and all these years, and I'm being open and honest about it now, and I want healing. Well, that's an admirable thing to do. That's a subject to maybe be taken up in therapy, perhaps, with a Catholic counselor who's going to lead them in the right direction. But that's different from, I've decided I am a woman, and I'm going to leave my family, and I'm going to mutilate my body, because this declaration gives me that right to trample all over my objective biological sex and the real relationships that I formed with other people. That's a different story.
Mm-hmm.
That's a different story. Self-mutilation and abandonment are objectively immoral. Admitting that I'm struggling with something psychologically is not immoral. Now, the question as to, whether the person should receive communion and whether you should intervene, obviously the communion question is going to be determined on the extent to which they are engaged in objectively immoral behavior without repentance. The question as to whether or not you should intervene boils down to this. Are you the most effective person to make that intervention? And are they likely to listen to you? I would think, if we can do this, that the most effective person, the most appropriate person to make that intervention, especially with respect to the sacraments, would be the priest. Or some other minister of the church, maybe who has a relationship with them, who could say with some authority, we love you, and we're going to do everything we can to help you. But if you are engaged in objectively immoral public behavior, it's not appropriate for you to come to communion. The minister of the sacrament would be the person most appropriate to make that admonition. But, kind of depends on the relationship. And then finally, are they going to listen to you?
Yeah.
Probably not. But there's some good material provided by the Courage Apostolate. This is an outreach of the Catholic Church to those that struggle with sexual identity issues. Courage. On transgenderism, homosexuality, and related conditions you might check out.
All right. And we do appreciate your call, Elizabeth. Thank you so much for it. It's called a communion here on EWTN. Your time is very valuable, and we know that here at EWTN. So where would you rather spend your time if you're looking for an update, if you're looking for news? Would you rather spend it, A, on a sketchy website full of half-truths or conjecture, innuendos, outright lies, or B, someplace that is just going to give you the news straight and just say, look, this is what it is. You draw your own conclusions. You know what? That's where I want to be, and that's why I like to use the National Catholic Register, whether it's the print edition or the online edition. It is absolutely fantastic. It's America's most trusted Catholic news source with a comprehensive view of the world from a distinctly Catholic perspective. So you can give the Register as a gift, or you can subscribe for yourself by going to ncregister.com, ncregister.com. You won't be sorry. Catholic, we roll on right here with a call to communion on your Catholic network, EWTN. Here now, Carol in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, on our great partner there, Catholic Community Radio. Hey, Carol, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I'm wanting to ask about the mental health saints. I know about Saint Dymphna, that was an Irish saint that was beheaded by her father, who was grief-stricken over his wife. But you mentioned a male saint one time.
Yes.
I don't remember.
I had in mind I mentioned Benoit Joseph Labre, or in English, Benedict Joseph Labre, who was a Frenchman, and his life goal was to enter a monastery. No one would have him because he was not mentally well.
Okay.
And so he started a pilgrimage. He was sort of walking south, and he would basically knock on the door of every monastery and ask for admission, and they all politely told him no. And he just kept walking, and eventually he found himself on the streets of Rome, and he lived as a homeless person in the city of Rome. And but he was very pious, and he began to gather the little orphan waifs that were scattered about the Rome and teach them catechism and do good works. And people began to notice this guy who's not altogether there is a person of enormous self-sacrificial charity and of deep piety. And of course, when he died, he was canonized.
How about that? So there you go, Carol. Hope that's who you were thinking about. Thank you so much for your call. It is called Communion here on EWTN. Let's go to Walker now in a great town, David. He lives in Devine, Texas. I think that's fantastic. Listening on the EWTN app. Hey, Walker, what's on your mind today?
Hi, I was just wondering, so how does God judge the people who believe in other religions, like they truly believe in it? They were born and raised with that religion.
Sure.
And if they don't believe in Catholicism, how would God judge those people?
Yeah, thanks. He judges them the exact same way he judges Catholics. He judges them by their works. God does not judge us by the conceptual content of our belief per se, unless the matter of belief is a question of obedience, all right? But the obedience goes to the will and goes to, the acts of virtue. He judges us by our works. If someone has not been exposed to Catholicism, or they haven't been exposed in a way that makes the faith persuasive to them, right, well, you can't possibly believe in good conscience something that you are not persuaded is true. And if for whatever reason, through just ignorance or bad catechesis or poor evangelism or whatever, they're not persuaded that the faith is true, you can't be morally obligated to believe something that you can't see how it could be true, you see. Now, once you become persuaded of the truth of the Catholic faith, well, now you're morally obligated to believe it, because it's a matter of obedience to conscience. But where judgment happens at the level of our moral behavior in response to those things that we are morally responsible for. And we can only be morally responsible for things that we know are right and wrong.
Right.
Now, it's a little bit more complicated in this respect, that none of us can really do the moral good unless we are aided by grace. So just knowing the good, whether we know the full truth of the Catholic faith or whether we are able to discern only those truths that we can see from the natural law, knowing the good is one thing. Doing it is something else. And to actually do the good, we need the healing power of grace in our lives. Now, how do we get grace? The most effective way to receive grace is through the sacraments of the Catholic Church. And thus we call all people to Catholic faith. But it's not the only way. God can extend grace to those outside the household of faith, and we know that he does so. Catholic Church teaches, in fact, that God offers sufficient grace for salvation to everyone. Now, the fact that he offers it doesn't mean they get it, doesn't mean they appropriate it. But guess who gets to be the judge of that? God, not us. It's very freeing and liberating to be a Catholic, because I have the truth that I can share and present lovingly with someone else, but I never have to get involved in judging a soul. And if I, see my Hindu friend who seems to be such a charitable, wonderful person, and he loves God after his understanding, I don't have to agree with his understanding of God, but I rejoice in his love and friendship, and I'll leave the question of the judgment of souls up to God.
Fantastic. Hey, Walker, thank you so much for calling us today here on EWTN's Call to Communion. Looks like we have time for one or two more phone calls if you want to give us a shout. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Phil sent us an email. It says, can you please explain the phrase, he came down from heaven and was incarnate in Mary, as it relates to before the incarnation? What did Jesus do in heaven? Was he a spirit like the Holy Spirit?
Yes, thank you. So Jesus is the name of the historical person born of the Blessed Virgin Mary in the Holy Land 2,000 years ago. But there's something unique about that person. That person has two natures. A human nature that was conceived of the Blessed Virgin Mary, but conjoined to that human nature intimately in his person, a divine nature. We also say that Mary gave birth to God because the nature, the divine and the human, are so closely allied in the one person that we're really talking about a single entity here, right? So it's proper to say that she's mother of God. But the divinity has no beginning. It's divinity. It's eternal. It's ineffable. It's utterly simple and immense and everywhere simultaneously in all its plenitude, right? That's divinity. Now, God in his divinity exists in three persons, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. A distinction of relation, paternity, filiation, spiration. The second person of the Trinity, second person, the Son who proceeds eternally from the Father, assumed, was conjoined to the human nature born of the Blessed Virgin Mary in her womb in the Holy Land 2,000 years ago. Now, Jesus Christ, Jesus is the name of that person born of the Blessed Virgin Mary, but of two natures, a divine, eternal, unchanging nature that assumed a human nature at a specific point in time.
All right. And we do appreciate your email, Phil. By the way, if you'd like to send us an email for a future show, the address ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Here now is Valerie in New Orleans, also listening on Catholic Community Radio. Hey there, Valerie. What's on your mind today?
Hi, thank you for taking my call. I know I don't have a lot of time, so I'll try to be brief. I was calling basically about, how as a Catholic can we support Black Lives Matter movement as a whole, and can we? Because the more I read into this, I'm not just talking about Black Lives Matter, the Foundation Incorporated, that everybody finds their website and sees all the Marxist, rhetoric on it and stuff. Like, that's not the issue to me. But when I see letters from bishops and arguments from other Catholics and Christians saying that you're not Catholic if you don't support Black Lives Matter as a movement because it's just anti-racist. And I just have this feeling in me, I'm like, I don't know, it just doesn't seem right, because what I can see is just like, there's just this basic ideology or this premise called the critical race theory that I've just found out about. And what it does is, like, I can't escape that even, like, this worldview has Marxist roots, and you're required to adhere to this worldview. Like, for example, if I try to put a Catholic perspective on it, I get shut down immediately as being racist, and they tell me I got to read White Fragility, and I've got to read, Bridge the Gap and other secular books. And so I ask these Catholic friends of mine, I say, well, where is it in the Catechism and teachings of the Magisterium that I should adhere to this worldview? And they can't tell me that, and they're adhering to it. So basically, my question is twofold. And I don't know if you've read any of the 1979 pastoral letter by the USCCB. I can literally take it and put it right next to the critical race theory, and they're almost the same, except the letter in the USCCB kind of just has like some, scripture in it and quotes from the Catechism. And so here's what I want to ask. Why are none of our leaders in the church addressing more the Catholic worldview? Because it appears as though we're being prompted to study and accept a secular worldview that's just being propped up by church teachings as opposed to the other way around. And then number two is, given this critical race theory and how this debate is being dominated by this worldview, meaning you can never, you're not allowed to say you're not racist, which goes against what Pope John Paul II said in Reconciliation and Penance, where this fatalistic...
We're running out of time, Valerie.
Valerie, I think I understand the question. I do definitely understand the question. And I really appreciate it because it's extremely thoughtful. And it sounds like the treatment to which you have been subjected is a form of fallacious reasoning that takes this form. All right, agree with me or I will browbeat you emotionally.
Mm-hmm.
That's not an argument, that's a threat.
Yeah.
Agree with me or I will browbeat you emotionally. That's not the way critical reason actually ought to work. When you say you haven't heard a whole lot from Catholics offering alternate interpretations of the social dynamics, they're out there, right? And you might take a look at the Journal of Religion and Public Life, First Things, as an example. It's not an explicitly Catholic publication, but has an awful lot of Catholics on the letterhead and typically offers a sort of different point of view.
Mm-hmm.
The Catholic philosopher Edward Fazer, his blog is a wellspring of critical reflection on social issues from traditional Catholic, Thomistic, Aristotelian point of view. I think that there is a tremendous amount of political pressure, not only to agree, and this is good, we should agree in the value of Black lives, to be sure, all right? But with an ideological worldview that may not actually cohere with the Catholic faith. But there's a tremendous amount of political pressure to bring those two things into one single assertion, to connect those. And I think the hesitancy of people to speak out is exactly the threat you encountered. Like if you offer a critical perspective, you're going to be shouted down and treated with opprobrium. So the response to that is charity, love, wisdom and critical reason.
That's all we can do. Wow, Valerie, what a great call to end with. Thank you so much for checking in with us today. Had to leave a couple of people here at the starting gate, Michael in Tulsa, Felipe in San Diego, and I would ask you to please call us next time that we're on the air with this program. We'll be glad to put you at the head of the line. Hey, Dr. David Anders, great show. Thank you, my friend.
Hey, thank you, Tom.
We do the program here on EWTN Monday through Friday on EWTN Radio, that is, 2 p.m. Eastern Time, with an encore at 11 p.m. Eastern. We also bring you a best of show on the radio side on Sundays at 2 p.m. Eastern. On behalf of our fantastic crew here, I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders. Thanks for joining us this time. We'll see you next time here on EWTN's Call to Communion. God bless.